That was part one of a Vermont movie. I'm Colin Parker, and we are here for a roundtable discussion talking about part one. We'll be doing this after all 6 of the parts of the Vermont movie. I'm joined by Nora Jacobson, who is the executive director and grand poobah of the entire project. Dorothy Tod, one of the other filmmakers from this part, and then also Rob Koier, who also played a role in this one particular part of the Vermont movie. Nora, let me start with you first about this project. 9 hours, 6 different parts, encompassing pretty much the entire history of Vermont. How do you boil that down into 9 hours? What was your original thought as you were going into this? And then how do you decide what goes into those 6 parts?
Well, oddly enough, it started as one film. We thought we were going to be making one movie, one 90-minute movie when this all started in 2006. And so it just grew from there. Basically what happened was we asked a bunch of filmmakers, at the time I think there were only 6 of us, to get involved, and we gave them a list of themes and examples from Vermont history and said, you pick one, and then we'll weave it together, we'll turn it into one movie. And so what happened was, as the footage started coming in, I realized that there were gaps in the story, really. If we were going to tell the story of Vermont, there were gaps. And so that's when we started adding more filmmakers and asking some filmmakers to actually work on specific segments. And then little by little, and it happened really imperceptibly, I wasn't even aware of it happening, that it just grew and grew. And the richness of the material made me think, well, we can't just make one 90-minute film because it would be this patchwork quilt montage. Let's just make it whatever it has to be. And that was 9 hours.
And the unique thing about this, I thought, was kind of going in, I thought it might be like a history lesson, you know, in 1626 this happened, in 1627 this happened. But it's not so much that. It's more about the people and the social ideas and those kind of things that go into what made Vermont what it is today. How did it become that instead of just a history textbook or Ken Burns' Vermont, if you will?
Yes. Well, always the idea of, does a state have a DNA? And that's really that was sort of the germ of the project. Does Vermont, the Vermont that we know today, does it have its roots in the past? So there was always this back and forth between the past and the present. And that's why the story is not linear. It doesn't go from, 1615 to 2014, because in our mind, or at least my mind, history isn't linear, and the past lives on in the present. And even the past, when you look at the past, you can see the germs of the present. And so there was always this sort of exciting, interesting dialogue between past and present. That was one thing. And then the other thing was, we never wanted it to be an academic history. Really, I see it as this glorified or really long home movie of Vermont by a people's history, really. And so the academics are given the same weight as regular people. There's really no hierarchy as to who has the authority to speak about Vermont.
And Dorothy, you were one of the filmmakers. You did the Samuel de Champlain portion of the movie. What did you learn about Champlain as you were doing this that you may not have known? And what do you think his legacy might be, as far as learning about Champlain and his role in founding Vermont?
We were starting this in 2006, and Vermont was just beginning to head into the whole celebration of the quadricentennial for Champlain. And I'm a paddler, and I loved Champlain's drawings. Often it's very difficult to get visual material from something of the 17th century. There's paintings, but not many. Certainly not in Vermont. There's some European ones, but someone who actually portrayed Indians, portrayed the way people lived. If you look at Champlain's drawings, you enter into this. Basically, he was creating a brochure to sell the New World to the king and to the French, and so that's why he did such beautiful maps and drawings. And his diaries are also very elaborate and descriptive, and he was able to kind of leave his French world behind and enter the birch bark canoe and become like the Indians. And that was what was really compelling to me, because I wanted to see how did Europeans first interact with the native population that was here.
And speaking of those canoes, let's take another look back at a clip from your segment in the Vermont movie.
It's all about the waterways. The waterways were the superhighways, the interstates, the way that people moved, armies, navies, and commerce for the thousands of years that the native folks were here, for the 400 years after Champlain until very recently, and in some of our interconnected waterways still being done.
Prends mon canot, je le lance à travers les rapides.
Tell me a little bit about the reenactor real quick and how that all came about. Is he a well-known reenactor of Champlain in this area? Or?
He's from Trois-Rivières, and he's a friend of Nora's, and I've actually known him from some other production we did years ago in Middlesex, but he wanted all this material in French, and that, I took French in high school, it's not very, and college, but I was never very good at it, so I was busy getting these diaries from the special collections at UVM, where you had English on one side of the page and French on the other, and Xerox again, trying to create a script for Francois, because he wanted it in French, and so I thought this was important, he thought that was important, and Nora thought this was important, and we ended up with something.
Okay, Rob, we'll move over to you now, and you did the Underground Railroad segment of the Vermont Movie. Let's take another look back at the Vermont Movie, and this is Rob's clip from the Vermont Movie.
Fearing I should be taken, I immediately left and went into the town of Ludlow, where I met with a kind friend. I was then conducted into a safe retreat, where there was a bed provided for me. I felt so singularly happy. At last I became alive to the truth, that I was in a friend's house, and that I really was free and safe.
It's no secret this is one of the more stylized, film-like film-like segments of the Vermont Movie. Tell me a little bit about I'm assuming you have a very good filmmaking background, and how you brought that into this, and why you decided to take that tack with this portion of the Vermont Movie.
Yeah, well, I have more of a history in narrative filmmaking, doing many narrative shorts and a feature like 10 years ago or something, and documentaries is more new to me. So yeah, I think from the beginning when I spoke to Nora about doing the Vermont Movie, I was very curious about trying to do, incorporate fictional into that and do recreations or something like that. And then this segment wasn't planned at all, actually. I was working on the segment about just a documentary style segment about the history of African Americans in Vermont for Nora, trying to help expand that segment, which had already been shot. And at one point, doing research, I went to Rokeby Museum and found these amazing old fugitive slave narratives that Rokeby Museum had. And there had actually been several slaves that were in Rokeby Museum, had worked there, lived there in the past. And so seeing that text kind of, brought my narrative mind to work, I suppose. And Nora and I talked about it and decided to work on a recreation of those texts, basically. So that's kind of how it evolved.
Okay. Rob and Dorothy, thank you for being here and being part of the Vermont Movie. Nora, I want to turn to you one last time. Part 2 is coming up. It's called Under the Surface. Tell me a little bit about what we're going to be seeing in Part 2 during the next segment of the Vermont Movie.
Well, Under the Surface is literally under the surface, both in terms of the granite industry and the marble industry, but it's also about some of the things that people don't necessarily know about Vermont. And so it's a journey into an alternative view of Vermont. So for example, we'll find out more about the eugenics movement in Vermont. We'll find out about the back to the land, the early back to the land people, what I like to call the gentle Republicans, the rural Republicans like George Aiken. So it's one of the richer and weightier parts of the Vermont Movie, probably. I think it's probably one of the longest, too.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nora Jacobson, for being here with us. Also, Rob Koier and Dorothy Tod for your participation in the Vermont Movie. I'm Colin Parker. We will see you back here for Part 2 coming up on Vermont PBS.